Morning from Washington County. My name is Catherine Cassidy, and I'm the consultant for the Board of Directors for the Wild Blueberry Heritage Center, an all-volunteer nonprofit in Columbia Falls. This is sort of a tricky technology moment for us. Jolene is moving the slides, and I'm speaking as the moderator, and we hope this works. Thank you for being part of us, for joining us. Our workshop today is called Funds to Friends, Why Relationship Building is the Ultimate Outcome. And our theme is this: getting a much wanted competitive grant gets an organization started on projects that can be measured. But relationships for the long run can be considered even better than metrics in the moment. We are honored for having been selected to present at this formidable conference. Thank you for allowing our group to share our amazing, precious corner of Maine. Yesterday, the keynote speaker talked about having grace and space as values. And today we suggest that we think about sharing and caring as part of our relationships. Is everything going well so far? Can we? Okay. Slide 2. We have 6 of us speaking today. 3 are board members, 2 are longtime friends. And we believe that trusted and longtime relationships bring their own richness into the room, especially for fledgling organizations that may not yet have broken through to getting sizable grants and reliable funding. You can see that's me on the left. Nancy is in the middle as a documentary filmmaker from apple picking country in upstate New York. And Jolene, one of our board members, is a professor of new media at University of Maine. Next. Brian, on the left, is also a board member and a special education teacher at the Indian Township School here in Washington County. David is a friend who goes back 3 decades, coming to Maine from New York City for 32 straight summers to join the raking community on the Barrens. And Marie Emerson is the visionary behind the Wild Blueberry Heritage Center and Museum project. We each have a story to tell, how relationships have guided and nurtured us in our work and passion. These experiences show why we feel such strong connections with the land, with local food, and with those who surround us. We encourage you to consider what each of us has learned, that doing good for the community through receiving grants isn't always just about the money. Very often, it's about how friendships and shared experiences combine for enduring and lasting benefits long after the program's duration ends. We gained 501c3 status in 2017, 4 years ago. But long before that, Marie and Del Emerson ran a blueberry farm called Wiscogus Berries in Addison. 20 years ago, they built by hand the Big Blueberry, a giant blueberry-shaped structure along US Route 1 in Columbia Falls. It was Marie Emerson's dream to make a place where visitors leave with a smile and a piece of blueberry pie. And this July, that building transitions into the Wild Blueberry Heritage Center and Museum. I want to try to adjust something here. So the museum opens to the public in 2 months as COVID eases and as summer in Maine returns to normal. And these boxes are from the days when there were dozens of small processing companies. And when the fields, oh, I've lost something. Okay, no, gotta manage. I'm back. And when the fields were hand-raked by thousands of local families, Hispanic migrants, and tribal members who traveled here from Canada's Atlantic provinces. This is why Marie dreamed up a museum that celebrates the glory days of the wild blueberry traditions and culture and presents possibilities for the next generation of blueberry growers. COVID aside, there is nothing normal about Maine's wild blueberry sector today. It's not the way it used to be for hundreds of small growers and generations of Washington County families. Big rocks have been removed from the landscape, and big harvesting machines have replaced the rakers. It's hard to make a living in wild blueberries anymore, and it's a fast-changing industry. From 800 blueberry growers in Maine 15 years ago, today in Maine there are fewer than 400 small growers. The land that used to grow wild blueberries has shrunk from 60,000 acres to about 38,000 acres today. Farmers are selling out and they are getting out. This sign is right across the road from the University of Maine's Blueberry Hill Experimental Farm, where Del Emerson got his start in the blueberry industry in 1953. He retired as the farm manager 12 years ago, but he continues as a small grower at Wescogus Berries, even at age 86. The industry is changing, not only from the perspective of small farms and growers, but for the people who kept returning to the harvest every August. You may have seen reference in the last 9 months for a new documentary film called Voices from the Barrens. The filmmaker is Nancy Gertner of upstate New York. She is our first presenter, and she begins with a land acknowledgement.
Good morning. The documentary film and these projects have been made across the ancestral lands of the Wabanaki, the Abenaki, the Maliseet, the Mi'kmaq, the Passamaquoddy, and the Penobscot. We honor the land and traditions of the Wabanaki people and are grateful for their voices and knowledge shared in this film and projects. In the acknowledgement of this land in eastern Maine and the maritime provinces of Canada as Wabanaki land, we are aware of continual violations of water, territorial rights, and sacred sites in the Wabanaki homeland. Good morning. This is an image from the film by the source of the St. Croix River, and you were seeing the elders blessing the canoe journey between the two communities of the Passamaquoddy. So I'm thrilled to be sharing a journey which I began 20-some years ago to learn who were the people climbing the ladders to pick the apples that I bought at local farm stands, and whose hands gleaned the onions on huge harvesters, separating rocks and debris from the ripened vegetables. Whose hands harvest the food we eat? In 2012, after the release of a documentary we made called After I Picked the Fruit, The Lives of Farm Worker Women, my friend Ormis and Ignacio crew bosses asked me to take fall photos of their crew for the men and women to take back to Mexico. They said, Nancy, you need to meet the Honduranos. They came from Maine, from the blueberry harvest. This was a call to me, as I was always going to Maine to visit friends in Washington County and Norwich Walk. This was a different migration from Maine's blueberry harvest to New York and Michigan's apple harvest, back to Maine for wreath making, and then in Portland, where many of the families, mostly men, would spend the winter or return to Honduras because they had a special visa based on the hurricane, whose name I have forgotten, that permitted them to visit for a couple months to their homeland. So the next year, after meeting these harvesters in New York, the next year I traveled solo to Maine with a small camera to research the wild blueberry harvest. I photographed at Wyman's and Cherryfield Foods with permission from the hand rakers to take their images and from the field managers who carefully led me to places they wanted me to see. One day I went to the Raker Center, which that year Falls, the same location as the Blueberry Heritage Museum. It was in the Columbia Falls Town Hall. The Raker Center is a multi-agency effort to provide in a single location all the resources for the migrating farm workers. The agencies range from registration for the Blueberry Harvest School, which is Maine Migrant Education, to Maine Mobile Health, to weekly food distribution. When I was at the Raker Center, I met Donna Sillyboy, who, from Cape Breton's Mi'kmaq First Nation community, Eskasoni, invited me to her cabin up in Township 19. The story of finding the camp, meeting the harvest supervisor, gaining access from the Passamaquoddy Wild Blueberry Company field managers is one of relationship building. I found open-heartedness, and at the same time, I acquired on my part a slow acquisition of acceptance, an adjustment to the dominance of the sky, of rock, of breeze, of heat, thunder at day's end, and a people who were so wrapped up in the love of their land, a respect for the very work which they did voluntarily. Yes, they were compensated with $2.25 a box, but they came because it was their vacation time, and it was an annual return, a migration to the very fields that their ancestors would the same during the blueberry. And their relations has extended forward and backward in time, and there was a huge tribal network of families reconnecting. For me, there was no others than that which was here. As a side note, the politics that dominated the farm worker labor where I came from were based on a lack of local workers, which drove people and farmers and growers acquire is the correct human type word to acquire labor from primary people who crossed the United States and the border. And the politics of the border manifested with all levels of racism where I live. The Border Patrol traced people after the harvest, all kinds of stuff like that. And for me, when marching the harvest, there was a total different experience. With their tradition of seasonal migration, and for the Canadian First Nation that treaty rights, they could cross an international border, work, and then return home. That does not happen at other parts of the United States. So from 2014 forward, the next 6 years, we began a steady relationship build, accepted as a stable presence for August, both in the fields, and we were often invited to community events. filmmaking, there is a collaboration of resources that ends in what you might imagine: a camera person, an audio recorder, a director, and often a coordinator of the day's events. But there are many more. Show you of creating a visual and audio story. Today, I would add there are people who support and give birth to these stories, and I would like to thank Marie and Dell Emerson and the Wild Blueberry Heritage Board for the insights and help which came to this film project. Marie was always a resource as to who somebody was, where I might find this person, and such a positive force for continuing the project for years when it didn't seem like anything was going to move forward. And finally, although the Voices from the Barrens is a very specific engagement with the Passamaquoddy, Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Penobscot, who hand-rake at the tribal-owned Passamaquoddy Wild Blueberry Company, a small company, its truth reflects aspects of the wild blueberry harvest in Maine. The time that the film passes through is a time of difficulties of economic competition on the global market for the wild blueberry, a time of mechanization of the harvest due to advancement in technology, which is always a force in agriculture, and the human aspect, the universal involvement that we all have with food production, with our own human histories, asking us to honor the hands that bring in the food. We want our food to be quote unquote slow food. We want to know where it came from. We desire a healthy regard for our planet and its resources. For me, the value of hand labor to the rakers themselves in this story, the power of their engagement with the and the gifts it gave back to them, is for me a different way of looking at food production, that the involvement of the people gathering the fruit, growing the food, is also part of the sustenance that we get. So I don't know if we'll be able to see the trailer at this time, but the statement in the trailer that we are keepers of Mother Earth, not owners of the land, it gives us a chance to experience the connection to Mother Earth ourselves on the Blueberry Barrens. Hello again. I believe, can somebody give me a thumbs up to continue?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. So I'm just showing you one more slide, audience and my fellow presenters. I think I will give everybody a link so they can watch the trailer and hopefully connect you to the film. maybe in the chat window. So we're ending the first year of the story's release. We've had screenings at film festivals out of state and in state. Organizations, colleges are starting to show the film. Maine Public aired in February, and in June, a Portland middle school is going to take a look. So it's as I said, that filmmaking is a process of collaboration, and we expect to go forward with getting an outreach period and the so-called AKA marketing. But what I wanted to say, for me, it's like the journey is really continuing, and I wrote this down, so go with it. What is amazing for me personally is the continued effect of the film's relationship to the Wabanaki people who participated and nurtured it. By standing back, by learning to listen, their present experiences and their past memories are creating a continuing story through panel discussions, through answering questions, many ways. And as our relationships continue and we move forward, it's like more than I ever expected. There's no ending. It's a continuing, which is quite different in my experience. So today I'm thrilled to have been able to reflect on the documentary process through the thoughtful themes of this workshop and with the help of my fellow presenters from the Wild Blueberry Heritage Center, whose dedication to the land and to the indigenous foods is remarkable. This is a picture, screen snapshot of one of the Zoom panel discussions. And in this case, it was a traditional Zoom. It wasn't a webinar. So there's all kinds of people, Wabanaki and audience together. And I end with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nancy. That was beautiful. And I hope that others who couldn't hear the sound will go to the film's website, voicesfromthebarrens.com, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Next up
Yes,
is
I'll put it in the
Marie
chat
Emerson.
window.
Thank you. Marie Emerson, who is, we call her the Mother Tree.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us to help us keep Maine wild and to preserve this iconic system engineered by nature. If I'm a mother tree, then my husband, Dell, Farmer Dell, has to be the root system. But with wild blueberries, we have a rhizome root system. Unlike more than the 10,000-year-old ecosystem, Farmer Dell has been a steward of this special land since the early 1950s. I came along with the Back to the Land movement in 1974. And following Helen and Scott Nearing's philosophy of growing food in a way that nourishes the land and sustains this ancient landscape. This phenomenal gift of Maine's wild blueberries is due to the stewardship and maintenance of the indigenous people that have made these barrens viable for centuries. Thank you. Relationship building is today's subject, and we can take a lesson from this biodiverse ancient plant system. These rhizomes, there's been a lot of talk about roots in this conference, but farmers are known to be keen observers. You know, I think about my husband, Dell, at 50 miles an hour, he can identify any plant or weed in a field. It's an amazing gift. So given this time, I'd like to build a simile between the wild blueberry rhizome system and our relationships to diversity. First, this little heritage center and museum would only be just an idea without our wonderful volunteers. They have brought their biodiverse talents to make this vision fruitful. Thank you to them, all of you. Our keynote speaker, Letitia Brown, asked us yesterday about what would America look like without racism. I asked you to consider what our world would look like without natural biodiversity and authenticity. Maine's wild blueberries ancient system has changed so much in just the last generation. It has been shrinking in a time when health benefits and the interest in natural foods has been growing. Our biggest problem is really the new, more efficient, monocultured, cultivated plant breeds that are more productive than our extreme biodiverse natural system. So please take the wild pledge to help differentiate Maine wild from the new patented plants. As a sidebar, one thing that COVID has taught us is that information is needed to make good decisions. And learning about a system that grows horizontally by letting the light, the sunshine, and the warmth in can also grow relationships. It takes a long time to establish a wild blueberry field. Clearing the land and letting these rhizomes grow in a vertical, unlike a vertical or silo system, these rhizomes can lead to decentralizing and more biodiversity that can self-direct. That lateral system has the ability to solve problems. You know, our wild blueberries can throw just about anything at them. They can handle it. They adapt and survive drought, pest, disease, cold. Their survival of over 10,000 years is proof. This rhizome horizontal system gets different results than a vertical hierarchy system that does not allow room for deviation. Comparing our relationships to this wild blueberry ecology is a proficient process to tap into our creativity, imagination, teamwork, and collaboration. Our visionary volunteers have found ways like the Risings to be useful and solve problems through decentralizing. They add more biodiversity, which further and self-direct and flourish. COVID has also shown that like these horizontal rhizomes, this vertical decentralization with equal players and processes in place will get results. And like our wild ones, have more health benefits and greater flavor. Our wild blueberries can teach us to embrace biodiversity and let the sun shine in. Also to connect with the wisdom of Earth's living systems to illuminate our path forward. My hope is that the people here at the conference will recognize the special agri-anthropology and culture that has helped to build Maine's famous work ethic. In Washington County, just about all the kids rake blueberries for their school clothes. If they are over 40, they have a raking story, from snakes in the rakes to getting their hair caught in the winnow machine, building relationships while they sit on buckets in the fields. These are our oral histories, and they should be gathered. And I hope today that the folks here will help this little Down East Heritage Center. You know, the song of Letitia yesterday, she kept saying, hold on, in a beautiful voice. And that resonates because we in Washington County are trying to hold on to this wonderful ecosystem, which to me is not unlike the rainforest is to the world or the redwoods are to California. They're very special. We have millions of colognes that have been adapted to face anything, and their flavor and health benefits are wonderful. We need to preserve this system, and I hope that you will help us. Thank you.
Well, Marie, we are sharing a screen, Marie and I, at the Whitneyville Library. This last slide is Marie preparing the museum exhibits. And I'm a latecomer to Maine, to down east. I've only been here 20 years. But when the rakers come from all over, you know it. You just feel it. You see them in the stores. You see them talking at the end of the day. It's really a special treasure of Washington County. Marie has taught. She retired 6 years ago, but she was a teacher for 30 years at Washington County Community College. And she taught not just nutrition and culinary, but also hospitality. We want to turn to our next speaker now, David Stess, New York City as they come. And he's also been coming back to Washington County, to the Barrens, for 32 summers, and we expect to see him again. David is not just a raker, but he is an extraordinary photographer who works only in black and white film, and he does all of his own printing. He will tell you more about his art. David, please.
Thank you very much. It's certainly an honor to participate in this wonderful endeavor. Little did I know that in 1988, when I took a photo road trip with a fellow friend from the photo and film school that I went to at the University of Miami, that the sort of the arc of my life would be altered and set in a way that I had never expected. There was something about Maine I'd always wanted to visit, and it was sort of this magical place in New England that was part of New England, but yet separate in its own way. And in the summer of in August, actually, of 88, we took this trip. And of course, we followed the usual path up the coast. And, you get to this little town of Ellsworth, and most people take a right turn and go to Acadia. And Frank and I instead went north. In old ancient maps, it's sort of like you would see an unknown region and there'd be dragons. And down East Maine, north of Ellsworth, was like that. And in some respects, it still is a bit like that, which helps make it a magical place. So off we went, deep into the wilderness of down East Maine, and we came across a perpetual yard sale, and that was still there up until just maybe 10 years ago, outside a little town called Millbridge. And they told us about this wild blueberry harvest, and there were local people and that there were Native Americans there. And, we said, wow, we've got to check this out. So, this whole trip was sort of a trip of discovery and self-discovery, and also to see if I could take any decent photographs, if I really had, something in me that I could contribute to this art. And so off we went, and we found this place in Du Bois called the Strawberry Patch, which was Wyman's compound. And we met a young Maine kid, and he needed a ride up to his crew out onto the Barrens. And I'll never forget that ride for as long as I live. It's truly unique landscape. This austere, beautiful landscape. It's a little bit like a desert or an Arctic landscape. And of course, you're instantly disoriented when you're driving out onto this landscape. And off we went, and we ended up with this crew, and it was I think it must have been Friday, because they were waiting for their paychecks, and they were gathered around a bunch of, battered old vehicles, and they were harvesting these wild blueberries, which, I had no idea where a wild blueberry came from. And they showed me how to harvest them, which you use this thing that looks like a dustpan with teeth. It's called a rake, and you comb them off the plant. And so I did that, and you filled them up into a 5-gallon bucket, and they got a good laugh out of that. And then we went back and hung out with some of the rakers. This was mostly a local crew, with some people from parts of Maine, and then some tree planters who had come from Michigan. And it was a very tight-knit crew, and we all went down to the Narraguagus River and hung out and drank some beer, and some folks were smoking dope. And then we went back to the strawberry patch, which was the compound, and it was something out of time and place. It was the Wild West. It was truly, truly unique, and it altered the course of my life. I had been looking for a long-term sort of documentary project that I could weave into my life, and photograph from the inside, and to give back to the people that I got to know and photographed. Even in the mid '80s, when I was learning about the history of the photographic arts, I really thought a lot about the ethics of what I was going to do and how I was going to approach it. And I'd always picked berries as a kid, and so I was always attracted to sort of physical and labor work. And that first trip just changed me. And I remember calling up Wyman's the next year and finding out when the harvest started. And I flew from New York to Miami, got my car, which was at my folks', and drove all the way to Du Bois, Maine, and showed up at the sign-in period with some photographs of people on the crew, and including the crew leader, Alton Gray, and his wife, Elistine. And I showed up, and they were like, "This guy, I want to rake on his crew." And they looked at me like I had just escaped from a mental institution. They really had no idea what to do with me, but they signed me up. And I had brought a Polaroid camera with me, and of course I brought some black and white film. And so I proceeded to suffer horribly that first year. I was the worst raker on the crew. I couldn't get a handle on it. It was cold and wet, and I made a move to New York, but I was a Miami boy. So it was a suffering. It was truly, truly suffering. But I knew I would get the hang of it, the physicality of it, and I'd be good at it. And
David,
I had a chance
David,
yeah.
let me interrupt, please. First, Jolene, can you show more of his artwork? And David,
I'm sorry, I don't have more to show you. I tried taking more photos, but without like a professional setup, I couldn't take digital pictures of them that were worth anything, unfortunately.
David, look, we've got enough, but what we would like to hear is today. I mean, we love your stories.
Yes, well, I'm getting to that. So, little did I think that I would be living this world and thinking about the ramifications of what I was observing over the next few decades. It was a unique harvest. I knew that right away. It was still done by locals and Native Americans and some small groups that had found their way to Down East Maine. And it was still done by hand. And that was probably the last harvest left in America like that. And then over the next 15 to 20 years, the changes that would come were rapid changes. You had, by the early to mid 90s, you had Hispanic migrant labor come, professional migrant labor. And I really would go from crew to crew. I worked on one of the first Hispanic crews. I was one of the few non-natives on a native crew, because I wasn't just some guy with a camera. I was a really good raker, and they wanted me on the crew, and that helped build the respect that I needed over the course of many summers to get to know people, to take the kind of photographs that I wanted to take. It was easy just to show up and shoot a few people raking, but to live in the camps, to live in a tent, to get up at 4 a.m. every day and get out there on the fields and rake was the challenge. And it's something I grew to really love. And I've got to know people on a very intimate level, not just the rakers. I got to know the crew leaders. I got to know the farmers. I would go from the biggest crew to the littlest crew, and I would be one of the last people in the state of Maine raking, well into the late September. And it altered the course of my life. I became, sort of this migrant worker. I started to work in apples, which I still do, and I'm actually heading to an orchard tomorrow in New Hampshire to work for the next month. But you become part of this life, and you can then see how it's changed over these decades. And as the other speakers have talked about, the changes have been quite radical. And down East Maine, there were thousands of people that would come to Cherryfield, Maine in August. It was probably the fourth or fifth largest urban group of people in the state of Maine for that month of August. I mean, it was magical. And you had the locals, you had the Native Americans, you had inner city squatter kids, you had disaffected middle class suburban kids. These disparate groups found their way to this unique harvest, and that's really all been lost now. I'm one of the few people to still come back and rake. It's 99% mechanized now, even probably more than 99%. All the big companies, all but Wyman's, none of them have crews. Only the small crews that are left are fresh pack crews. It's really radically changed. And the changes that were wrought weren't just, who's doing it and how it's being done. I mean, they've altered the landscape physically to mechanize this. You had these beautiful glacial erratics on many, many fields, and they literally brought in excavators and they removed them. So when you drive around Washington County and down East Maine, you'll see, piles of rocks and walls of rocks, and those used to be on fields. They've kept some of the fields sort of as a beauty strip, so you can see that. But it's really altered the face of the community, and it's affected it, not just on the surface, but in a very deeply fundamental way.
David, you are remarkable. You are remarkable, and I think we would all say that. We look forward to seeing you very soon.
Yeah,
So-
thanks. I mean, obviously, no one goes into something like this to think that where you don't know where you're going to be in 30 years or where the world is going to be. And it's a blessing and it's a sadness that I was able to be there at the time of these fundamental changes in it. I was able to capture it sort of the way it was and then transition to what it's become now. And I really believe in what Marie is doing and Dell as farmers and as trying to give back to the community and finding a way forward for small growers, because I believe in that.
Thank you so much, David.
Sorry if I ran on there a bit. Sorry.
We can tell it is so deeply part of your life. Thank you. Our next presenter is Brian Giles. He is a special education teacher at the Indian Township School in Washington County. He's also a member of our board. And he is a Washington County native, and he will tell More about that shortly. Welcome, Brian.
Willie Spuzawil, Musquan, Naga Gazuswil, Deliwiz Brian Giles, Madokmaguk Skulik Diddlegaki Gim, Got Nil Skijin, Skijin Nil Ute Misun Hug. What I said was, good morning. The sky is blue and the sun is shining. My name is Brian Giles. I teach at Indian Township School, and I am not Passamaquoddy, but I have the Passamaquoddy very near to my heart. So today, I in all this conversation about relationships, it's got me thinking about several relationships. Relationship number one is my relationship to the blueberry and my relationship to the foods of Washington County. I have been here my entire life. I left to go to New Orleans for a time, and I left to go to Portland for a time. But Washington County has been my primary home, and it's been my family's home for since about the 1700s, when my family first came here from England and Ireland to settle in Millbridge and Cherryfield and Harrington and Lubec, and all these parts of Washington County. And my family and myself have had this relationship with the blueberry barons because we have always raked. I mean, I can remember the first time that I was able to rake for money. I was 12 years old, and I was in Lubec with my dad, and I had gotten a job doing some fresh pack blueberry raking. And I remember the being handed what, as David said, this thing looked like a dustpan with teeth, and saying, you're going to go and you're going to rake these berries, and you're going to get $2.50 for every bucket of berries that you fill, which to me at 12 years old seemed like a tremendous amount of money. And at the end of 4 weeks of raking, I had $500, and I went to the local Ames and bought some nice school clothes, which I thought Ames was top quality school clothes. And it made a huge difference to me. But on those fields at that time, everyone raked. There was no class separation. There was no racial separation. It was everybody in Washington County raked. It was how people survived. It was how kids got their school clothes. It was how poor folks paid their land taxes, or any folks paid their land taxes. It was how people paid for they might have bought their first car off their blueberry raking money. It was blueberry raking was so vital to the economic success of the people of Washington County. When I was about 14 years old, I became, right around the same time, actually with those first set of Ames clothes, I'm sure I met Marie's daughter, Chelsea Maffei. She was in my 7th grade class, and instantly became one of my very, very best friends. We were on the phone every Saturday night for way too many hours, back when a phone was still attached to the wall, watching Saturday Night Live together, and breaking rules that I don't even want to begin to admit to Marie back then. And of course, Forrest was there. Forrest was always there, always Chelsea's shadow, and a tremendous musician. Even then, he was a tremendous musician, and still is. He plays the piano like like nobody's business, and it's just a great time to be around. And so I've known Marie for a long time, and I've watched Marie's endeavors as both a culinary arts professor and with Dell in the blueberry industry, and the work that she's doing with the Blueberry Museum is tremendous to try to empower the small farmer, the local person who is trying to make their way in blueberries over the large mega corporations, and also to stand shoulder to shoulder with the giants of the high bush blueberries that we're seeing overpower the market and fill our grocery stores locally. I mean, when you go in and you see those big fat round blueberries, those are not blueberries from here. It's the small sweet blueberries that come from the soils of Washington County. And so Marie's work in this Blueberry Museum work is vital to educate local folks about the blueberry and its history here. So what do I do, and why does my voice matter in this conversation? I'm a teacher at Indian Township School. I said that, and I teach Passamaquoddy kids about not just special education, but also about food sovereignty, about the health of food to your body, how to grow food, how to maintain wild plants, how to forage, These are all parts of my educational program. We have a greenhouse at Indian Township, and we have raised bed gardens, and we have Three Sisters gardens, and we have an orchard that we put in. And the orchard doesn't just contain the apple, which, as what has been mentioned before, is from Kazakhstan, not the American fruit that we believe it is. But we have elderberries, and we have the American beach plum, and the beach plum and the American plum, and hazelnuts, and some other plants that are indigenous growing in our orchard, as well as the apple. We've included the apple there. But when I teach my kids about food, and when I teach them about the importance of food, I always teach them about the microbiome. The microbiome is the small microclimate in which you exist, in which your ancestors existed, right? It's the area immediately around you. It's truly local food, okay? And here's something that's amazing about local food. Local food acts as medicine for your body, right? If you have an allergy and you eat local honey, the local honey provided by the local bees from the local plants will help you defeat your allergies. Right, so those bees that are eating and those that are pollinating those blueberry barrens that are making honey are then providing you with the necessary medicine that you need to help fight against the allergies that are in the air around you. Right, that's your microbiome treating your body. Why does that work? It works because as I teach my children, and as we know, as the indigenous people have known for years and years and years, you can't just think about a single generation, but you have to think about your relationship with the past. When a woman is pregnant with a little girl, in her body at one time, she contains all of the eggs of not just, she contains the eggs of her daughter, but her daughter contains the eggs that she is going to have in her entire life while she's still inside of her mother's body, which means that all of the nutrition and the food that grandmother eats is the nutrition and the food that is going to be important for the health and well-being of that little girl, and then her children and her children's children, and so on and so on and so forth. Blueberries have been here since after the recession of the Wisconsinian ice era, which is about 18,000 years ago, and the Passamaquoddy people developed a relationship with those blueberries, and the relationship. I've always been fascinated by language. And here's an interesting fact about the Passamaquoddy language. There are words that linguistics call animate and inanimate, right? But that definition is no good. There in the Passamaquoddy language, there are words that you need to care about. There are words that you need to be concerned with. And those words, what the linguist would call an animate word is a word you need to care about. And blueberry is one of those things. A Duke deer is a creature. It's alive. That's an animate word. And surprisingly, zot, blueberry, is a word that is also alive, because it's something that the Passamaquoddy people have been deeply concerned with, because they know that the blueberry is not just food, but it's also medicine. It could be dried after harvest and be eaten throughout the year, added to soups, turned into salves and lotions, teas, and it could be boiled down into a syrup that would be used to treat coughs and colds. The blueberry is a vital part of the Passamaquoddy people, and it's also a vital part of the culture. The Passamaquoddy have many rituals, and one of the great rituals that I love, and Dwayne Toma talks about this frequently, is the meeting of the chiefs. So all of the Wabanaki people would come together in these great meetings a couple of times a year. And one of those times was on the blueberry barrens, pre-European contact and then post-European contact. As the colonization was happening, the Passamaquoddy people were keeping their culture and that shared culture alive through the relationship with the blueberry barrens. They would come together, and all of the Zogums from all of the Wabanaki tribes would come together, and they would share these dance rituals, welcoming each other in and sharing news of what has happened in all of their communities, and making big decisions together over the time on the blueberry barrens. You could do a tremendous amount of thinking while you're raking. not just thinking about the misery of the hornet stings and the snakes and the sound of the ting of the rake, but you can do a tremendous amount of processing of internal dialogue. And so if great decisions needed to be made, there was no better time than while everyone was out raking those fields. And in the evenings or in the afternoon, sitting on the buckets, those decisions could be spoken about and shared. Blueberries are vital to Washington County. They're vital to the Passamaquoddy people. And the work that Marie is doing is vital to the shared history of the sharing of the history and the preservation of the history of blueberries. So if you can help, please do. And with that, I will just end with Willie 1, and I'll pass on to the next speaker. Something still, someone. Oh, would you like me to discuss the last slide here? Sorry about that, Catherine. The other thing I wanted to say is that all my work in the Passamaquoddy school, my one goal is to teach the kids about the joy and the passion of agriculture and of food, and to ultimately remove myself from that equation, and so that I don't come in saviorism to the people that I work with. I come in servitude, and my goal is to simply teach the kids the skills that they can one day be the agricultural leaders in the Passamaquoddy community in agriculture.
Catherine, we can't hear you. Can anyone hear Catherine?
No.
Yeah, we can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank
There you go.
I'm back. Oh, goodness. Brian, thank you for the work that you do with the young people of Washington County. And also, we are so delighted that you're part of our board. Our last presenter, Jolene Blaze, is also a member of our board, and she is a professor of new media at University of Maine in Orono. Jolene. Jolene.
I'm just adjusting my tech. I have to switch screens, so bear with me for a moment while I check in. Hi everyone. It's really a pleasure to be with you all here today, and it really moves my heart to be among the speakers that you've just heard, because they are telling a story I've been trying to articulate for quite a while, each in their own way. This is a story that came to me when I was young. I grew up in Maine, and I came back to Maine to work after being away for a few decades. But I was really raised by the forests and the lakes and the mountains in Maine. And something speaks to you when you're raised in that way. And if you don't have a tradition to translate that for you, a native or indigenous tradition, you wander around trying to figure out what is speaking to you. Sometimes the farmers hear this, blueberry rakers hear this, people who spend time with native people hear this. But it really is a language that my culture doesn't hear and doesn't understand. And it took me a long time to process, what is it that's speaking to me? What is it that's speaking to us? How can I hear that? How can I share that? It took a trip to the Passamaquoddy in Subiac in 2004, shortly after I came back to Maine to teach at the University of Maine, to begin to understand what is speaking to me in the white pine and in the chickadee and in the loon and in the waterfalls and in the ocean surf. What is speaking to me? When I spent some time with Vera Francis in Subiac, she brought me to a meeting of the grandmothers. We were trying to figure out how to preserve the sweetgrass areas that were under threat by a proposed liquefied natural gas sort of project that was happening in the area, and the sweetgrass was in danger. It was one of their sacred sites, and they were trying to figure out how to survive economically, which the liquefied natural gas plant would help them with, but they also wanted to preserve their culture. So they're in this terrible dilemma that many of us find ourselves in a corporate world. And the grandmothers came together in a room and they told me that one of the ways of protecting and preserving the land so that we can continue to be in relationship to it and hear it is to make sure that we tell the stories of the land, that we create the stories of the land, that we hear the stories of the land, and especially that we raise our children with these stories, that we tell the stories to the children, because this becomes home for them. They begin to understand and hear what the land is saying, and they begin to be in relationship with the land. And so the first time I came up there, I came up with some graduate students in new media. And, like David with his camera and like Nancy with her video camera, we came with all of our tech trying to figure out how we could be of use or helpful or how we could learn. And, here I am with things in my ears and things on my face. And, I'm surrounded by something else speaking to me with this massive technological world with Instagram and Facebook and, websites and, augmented reality and virtual reality. And my students are enmeshed in this space. And I was just really distressed by the way that even though they grew up in Maine, many of them, they were just being taken over by these technological voices. Now, obviously, in these technological voices, humans are speaking to each other, but we've forgotten that there are other voices besides humans. And the blueberry is one of those voices. And so many years later, I had the opportunity to help my students get out of the kind of haze of technological voices and back into the natural spaces they might have spent time in as children. And that was because Marie and Dell Emerson came to the University of Maine looking for help with their museum. My partner and colleague had worked at the Guggenheim before we both came to Maine, and they said, "Oh, we need somebody to help with the museum." And I said, "Well, hello, tell me who you are." And they told me the story of blueberries in their neighborhood. And I said, "Well, I happen to be teaching a class this afternoon in digital storytelling. Can you please come and visit and tell your story to my students?" So without knowing very much about their entire story, I invited them into my classroom. And this started a 6-year relationship that my students began to develop with Dell and Marie and with the Wild Blueberry Barons. And they have been producing stories about this space for this entire period. And what I'd like to show you today is not my perspective about this, but what really moves my heart is that my students have begun to reconnect with these wild places and to tell their stories. So they are the ones telling the stories from the place where children who connect with the land hear the stories and tell them. So my students who are geared up with all their headphones and iPhones and everything else are coming back to the land and hearing the stories because the blueberries are speaking, because the big blueberry land dome is speaking, because Marie and Dell, who are farmers, are speaking, because David Stess is speaking, and because Nancy Gertner and Brian Giles, because we're all speaking for the blueberry and we are beginning to hear its story. So I want to show you some of what my students have come up with to sort of help bring the stories or connect the stories to the land, and in the process also develop their own memory and connection to this really special land. So the first slide I'm showing is the actual virtual Blueberry Museum, which was built by a number of my students. Ashley Duggan and Eli Farnham were the main architects of the site, but there were also many students who developed many videos, which unfortunately I can't show you today. We have sound problems with videos like we had with Nancy's. But you can go to this website. I put the URL earlier in the chat, and you can actually see the videos there. But I'm going to show you right now just the websites and the various projects that my students over 5 years have built to tell the story of the blueberries. So first of all, we have this website, which is currently the virtual museum. This tells the many-layered story of the blueberry. If you scroll down the page, you can see the blueberry barons, you can see the shacks and the moose and all the animals that love blueberries. You can't hear the sound of it, but we do have sound that was taken from that area. You can see the rhizomes that Marie was talking about too. And here is a really beautiful short little video that one of my students made about how we have to help wild blueberry farmers and culture to preserve this really special area. Part of the story lies in the 10,000 year or even further back, the glacial history. And so there is a very old aspect of the story, creating the sort of the glacial formations that created the situation where this adaptogenic plant that is so healing for us can grow. The next part of the story is a 10,000-year-old story of the indigenous culture of wild blueberries that you learned a little bit from David in his photographs and from Nancy in her video. Following that is a really interesting development and innovation. Wild blueberries were canned, sort of capturing vitamin C that was really pivotal in helping the Union soldiers in the Civil War, keeping them healthy and preventing infection and disease. And that was a really important part of the blueberry story. UMaine has done many, many years of agricultural research. Del Emerson has spent decades working with them and researching with them at the Blueberry Hill Farm, and lots of information about how to grow blueberries and how to keep them healthy was developed through this university partnership. And finally, there's been, or not finally, but one of the other major sources of the blueberry story is really the story that we're getting through science. Obviously, the Native Americans have known this for, centuries, but we are just catching up with our science and learning about all of the varied health benefits of wild blueberries, how important it is to that local nutrition that Brian was talking about, and also to overall health. Plants that grow in really stressful environments can sometimes help humans when they're under stress. Those plants are called adaptogens, and the wild blueberry, if it hasn't yet been recognized as an adaptogenic plant, probably should be. And then you have the wild blueberry heroes, who are the local farmers and the pie makers. There's Marie in the middle. The journalist, Ruth, is here, and Del is on the right. But they're stories of the wild blueberry heroes, the people who make this whole culture sustain and regenerate itself, and who we really want to support in the process. So that's the website. As part of the website, you can go to another page, which is where the stories are. And this basically gives you a list of all the videos that we've created. We did an interview with the Passamaquoddy wild blueberry folks. We interviewed Alfred and Rodney Bushway about their farm. We interviewed Lawrence Lord to talk about his farm museum. Ben Perrin runs one of the few organic farms that David was talking about left, where people still rake and sell fresh blueberries. And here's Del Emerson's story here. So we basically have stories from video stories that my students prepared and presented on the website. So that was another part. That was from a digital storytelling class that my students produced. They really were transformed by this experience. They were worried about, do we have to drive all the way out to, down East Maine? And they were never the same after having visited the place. They said, this place is so amazing. It's so beautiful. The fall harvest is even more surprising than the foliage that people talk about in New England. How come we don't know about the Bold Coast and all the hikes here and the amazing culture, even though we're from Maine? What a gem. What a beautiful place. Can we find some way to help and preserve this? They were really transformed. So I'm talking about the most technical, students coming back to nature and being completely transformed by their experience. So I was so grateful to Marie for opening this experience up for my students. And then they also produced, this is a video which we can't show you, but this is the Burkhill Farm video. I will put links in there for that. They also produced a Facebook page, Help Keep Maine Wild. This is one of the things that really stuck out for them, that there was some place in the world that still held what was wild about them. If you don't hold spaces outside of yourself that are wild, you cannot hold what is wild within yourself. You can no longer be free. You can no longer be a natural being. Gandhi was once asked, what do you think of civilization? And he paused for a minute and he said, well, it would be a good idea. And I think that that's a really interesting comment on sometimes we lose sight that our civilization is sort of giving us all these benefits, but we lose sight of what it's taking away from us. And I think that our word for what is valuable might be wild. I think a native word might be different because they wouldn't make that dichotomy of wild versus civilized. That's kind of a false dichotomy. So what we really are looking for are the relationships that this whole conference talks about. How can we come back into relationship with the land? And so for my students, the word wild helps them bridge that gap, but that's where they're trying to go. So they created this Facebook page, Keep Maine Wild. They created blueberry emoji stickers that you can use on your phone, and you can sort of text using memes and emojis with muffins and berries and pies. They created videos. about all of this. They created a whole Keep Maine Wild poster campaign with different animals. If we scroll down this page, you can see a number of the, there we go, a number of the animals that they created. Their little video that was an animation that everything eats wild blueberries, even chameleons. There are more posters. One of my students, Colby Fogg, created some, basically a story in graphic design of the entire blueberry process. And this story, actually, this sort of graphic design story was featured in the first University of Maine edition of the Maine Journal of Conservation and Sustainability. These are all of his artworks in that. And you can see that the final one is the blueberry growers. So he was inspired to create that project. This is a Twine interactive story that's also on the website. Another one of my students created that, and you can sort of navigate through that story, that interactive story, and you can learn what happens to the blueberry on its way to harvest and on its way to the people who are lucky enough to eat it and benefit from it. And then finally, my students this semester recreated a whole website for Wild Blueberry Land. And I can put that link in the window itself. So that's just a very brief overview of some of the ways that when young people are introduced to this area, how they want to tell the story, how they want to interact with this place, how they want to share that story in the mediums that are native to them, which are social media and website and, these other spaces. But to bring part of the wild into those spaces, I think is really critical. And I am really grateful to Marie for opening up this opportunity for my students to reconnect with their wild side and to keep them wild. We want to keep Maine wild, but we want to keep my students wild as well. So thank you very much for that opportunity.
Jolene,
Yeah.
David,
Amazing.
Nancy, Brian, Marie. Wow, we have come to the end of our time. Thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you to our listeners. And we hope that you've enjoyed our stories. And we hope that you also join us in realizing that another value of applying for and getting grants is the human aspect of forming friendships that last and forming friendships that matter. I think we're at 10:15.
Perfect.
Anyone want parting words?
I'll say one thing that, the changes that have happened in American agriculture over the last 150 years didn't come to Maine till very late, and then they came in a rush. So we've seen these changes in less than a generation, from local and hand done to mechanized to global agribusiness. I mean, and it's been a tremendous dislocation to the culture and the community down east.
Thank you, David. Sarah, where do we go from here? Thank you, everyone.
I think that's it. We're no longer live, right?
I think we're